All right, Young and the Restless fans, the year is 1975. For many of the major players in Genoa City, 1975 started out on a positive note, although as the year progressed, the winds of change would challenge their faith, courage, and resiliency. For example, Philip Chancellor made a New Year's resolution to marry Jill Foster during the coming year. His wife, Kay, joined AA in an attempt to turn her life around. After having it out with her sister Lori, Leslie Brooks promised Brad Elliott she would marry him, and the couple set their wedding date. Greg Foster went to bat for the woman he loved, Gwen Sherman, extracting a promise from Leslie to give her back her old job waiting tables at the Allegro. He even got Stuart Brooks to promise not to use Gwen's name in a Vice Ring story set to run in his newspaper. Liz Foster was slowly but surely becoming closer to Sam Powers, and even the restless Lori Brooks was becoming excited about a new romantic partner in her life who did not belong to someone else, Dr. Mark Sherman. As it turned out, Kay's impetus for attending AA was her undetected glimpse of Philip and Jill locked in a tight embrace. At first, she couldn't wait to get back to her room to hit the bottle again, and over the next several days, she languished between bouts of seething rage, even though she knew it was her drinking that caused her to lose Philip in the first place, and self-pity. Then she knew what she had to do. She called Vivian Anders, her sponsor in AA, stunning both Philip and Jill. Philip told Kay how proud he was that she was taking this all-important first step, and the very moment that Brock learned about it, he hurried over to her AA meeting to lend his support. Kay was impressed with the sincerity of the AA members who, under Vivian's chairmanship, each in their turn recited the program's 12 suggested steps before declaring themselves. When it was Kay's turn, Vivian noted with disappointment her chair was empty. But Kay did return later to declare herself, just in time for Brock to witness it with love and pride. The process of withdrawal was both painful and scary, but Kay persisted. She was going to lick this problem if it was the last thing she'd ever do. She found comfort from reading the Bible, and as the days and weeks went by, she devised a strategy to land Philip back in her arms. Inundate everyone with kindness. Philip, Jill, Brock, Liz, that's what Kay would do. And in the process should make Jill feel even more guilty than she already was feeling for daring to fall in love with Catherine Chancellor's husband. This new tact seemed to be a far cry from the sodden Kay who threatened to commit suicide if Philip left her, or the liquor-crazed Kay who held a gun on Philip and Jill, without their knowledge, of course, which didn't fire because the chamber was empty. But the greatest irony of all was that for all of Kay's efforts, she could not rekindle the love Philip once felt for her or match the new and joyful love he was experiencing with Jill. A love that was reciprocated in measure and kind. While this was going on at the Chancellor's, grave psychological and physical problems were ready to manifest themselves at the Brookses. Jennifer had dearly wanted to visit the Hendersons in Chicago to be near Bruce, but Leslie's sudden rush to marry Brad overwhelmed Jennifer with a sense of emptiness over losing her daughter, and so she put the Chicago trip on hold. Add this to the anxiety she was feeling after hearing from Mark Henderson that his father and mother were on the verge of a divorce, and Bruce's sudden appearance in Genoa City begging her to leave Stuart and marry him. Jennifer summoned the courage to listen to her heart and then announced this decision to her daughters as she wanted them to hear it from her directly before telling their father. Just then they found out that Stuart had collapsed and rushed to Genoa City Hospital and went into cardiac arrest. His life was saved only because Brad, who happened to be at his bedside with Snapper, quickly reached for a syringe and injected it directly into his heart. Snapper followed this up by massaging Stuart's heart until a heartbeat was sustained. Jennifer's only consolation was that though she had betrayed Stuart in heart and should have to live with it, she hadn't told him what she had intended to do. Her daughters, including Lori, who of all of them she thought might understand, couldn't forgive her, and they made no secret of their resentment. For weeks, Stuart remained in guarded condition, but sick as he was, he knew one thing. He trusted the opinion of Bruce Henderson, a top cardiologist, and asked that he be brought in as a consultant. This not only stunned Stewart's entire family, but served to heighten the tension between Jennifer and her daughters. Fortunately, Bruce had the sensitivity to realize that Stewart's heart couldn't withstand an emotional shock. Bruce returned to Chicago, knowing that Jennifer would want to see Stewart through this terrible ordeal. But there was always the hope that he and Jennifer could have a future together. Snapper bitterly resented his father leaving them 9 long years ago and hated to see Liz work so hard to keep the family together. He nearly went through the roof when he learned his mother was still paying the premiums on his father's life insurance policy when she should be collecting money from it instead. As it was, Liz was genuinely worried that she wouldn't be able to meet expenses, especially since rumors of layoffs at the factory where she worked were rampant. So when Greg brought up the same subject of paying the premiums on his father's life insurance policy, Liz's anger exploded. All these years she had refused to declare William Foster Sr. legally dead, so what was the hurry now? In addition to the problem of cash flow, that hurry manifested itself in the person of Sam Powers, a date Snapper had arranged for his mother without her knowledge. Despite her attempts to banish thoughts of male companionship from her mind, Liz had to admit she did enjoy Sam's company, and for the first time since Bill left, Snapper noted she was reaching out to a man. Perhaps the time had truly come for the Foster family to declare William Foster Sr. legally dead. But an unexpected letter bearing a Chicago postmark, which Snapper received, changed everything. The letter was from Snapper's father. Bill Foster was terminally ill with lung cancer and emphysema and wanted to come home. Liz felt compelled to take him in so he could spend his final days with his family. And Sam Powers, gentleman that he was, said he understood and would wait for her. Thanks to Leslie, at least one of the more compelling problems that threatened to destroy her future with Brad was cleared up before they walked down the aisle. Leslie knew Brad blamed himself for being unable to save his son in surgery, so Leslie persuaded nurse Barbara Anderson, the boy's mother, to solicit opinions and statements from other doctors who assisted Brad on that ill-fated day. Their unanimous conclusion that Brad had done all he could and should not hold himself responsible for the boy's death helped to assuage much of the guilt Brad felt. But when Leslie asked Brad if he wanted to move to Chicago to resume practicing medicine there, Brad firmly replied that he wanted to begin his new life with Leslie right here in Genoa City. Leslie's wedding was everything she wanted it to be and more. She insisted her marriage to Brad was all she'd need to make her life complete. Yet Brad couldn't help but be concerned that she'd find marriage not as fulfilling as she had hoped, that there'd be something missing. Brad mulled over this very carefully. He had to do something to get her to return to the concert stage. With this in mind, he deliberately arranged for them to honeymoon in Palm Springs, knowing that the Mid-American Symphony would be performing there. It would afford him the opportunity to arrange a reunion between Leslie and Meister Fausch. To Brad's great satisfaction, everything worked out just as he had hoped, and the inevitable happened. Meister Fausch extracted a promise from Leslie that she'd make another concert appearance. Leslie was thrilled and grateful. Subsequently, Leslie flew to Buffalo, New York to give a concert, but without Brad. In the meantime, Brad made arrangements with the maestro not to let on that he'd be there in the audience. His motive was to prove to Leslie that she could perform without having him to lean on. He wanted to build up her self-confidence so she'd truly believe that her natural abilities would carry her through. The concert was a great success, and after Leslie's superb performance, Brad revealed himself and let her know how proud he was. More successes were to follow. But there was more happening over which Brad had limited or no control. He fretted over how Laurie's forthcoming novel, a story of two sisters, one of whom had suffered a mental breakdown, would affect Leslie. To exacerbate his worry, Leslie returned to the New York Mental Hospital in an attempt to deal with her past. She found that the same women who had terrorized her were still there. Brad had to go to rescue her before she became completely traumatized. Then there was the matter of Brad's own severe recurring headaches, which were affecting his vision and perception. He was determined his wife would not know about them. Mark Henderson diagnosed his condition as a swelling of the optic nerve and later arranged for Brad to check it himself in a Chicago hospital. After exhaustive tests, it was determined that the condition he suffered from was chronic neuritis and he'd eventually go blind. If anything was a certainty, it was that Brad would do everything in his power to prevent Leslie from giving up her career. Back at the Chancellor's, Jill, unaware that Kay was onto her, was so guilt-ridden about her feelings for Philip that she decided to leave there for good. Taking no chances, Kay went to see Liz, who knew about her daughter's affair with Kay's husband. Kay played on Liz's sympathy, professing her undying love for Philip. Later, Liz advised her daughter that she couldn't build her happiness on someone else's misery. Then, in supposedly gracious moment, Kay offered to pay for a college education for Jill as a farewell gift, but the heartsick girl burst into tears and declined to take her up on her offer. Jill's brothers urged her to reconsider. She'd be making an investment in herself and her future. Feelings of guilt and insecurity were flooding over her when Philip took her in his arms at the bunkhouse and made passionate love to her. Jill didn't resist. Kay witnessed the indiscretion, and it nearly destroyed her. It took all of the strength she could muster up to keep from hitting the bottle again. However, Kay continued her facade of being kind to Jill. For insurance, she persuaded her son Brock, who had been attracted to Jill, to propose marriage. Feeling unwanted, the confused young woman accepted, and Brock, a self-styled preacher, performed the ceremony. But the marriage wasn't consummated and lasted only until Jill discovered she was pregnant with Philip's baby. When Jill told Philip she was carrying his child and that her marriage to Brock wasn't legal, Philip was overjoyed. He immediately investigated the matter of getting a divorce in the Dominican Republic, which sent Kay straight to the bottle. In a drunken stupor, Kay signed the divorce papers, striking out any claim to a property settlement, which she didn't want if she couldn't have Philip. Jill was on cloud nine. She immediately negated her invalid marriage to Brock, and told her family she was marrying Philip Chancellor. Upon Philip's return from the Dominican Republic, a stone-sober Catherine met him at the airport and offered to drive him home. On the way, she begged him for another chance. When Philip rebuffed her, she pressed her foot down hard on the accelerator as they were rounding a dangerous mountainous curve. The car plunged over a cliff. As Philip lay dying in a hospital bed, he asked the hospital chaplain to marry him and his beloved. Soon afterward, he was dead. Over time, Kay recovered and waged an endless round of legal maneuvers. Ultimately, Jill's marriage to Philip was declared invalid, and Jill and her family were evicted from the Chancellor estate where they'd been living since Philip's death. To put icing on the cake, Kay offered the pregnant girl $1 million to raise Jill's unborn child as her own. At first, Jill was repulsed by such an absurd offer, but then thought better of it and relented for the good of the baby and her family. Elsewhere, it was Regina, Bruce's estranged wife, who blew the whistle on Jennifer. After a bitter confrontation with Stuart, Jennifer admitted she loved Bruce and would have left Stuart had he not had a heart attack. Stuart asked her to get out now, immediately. Jennifer took the next flight to Chicago to be with Bruce. It wasn't long after that Jennifer discovered a lump in her breast, which turned out to be malignant. Having a mastectomy was the worst experience of her entire life. Jennifer withdrew from having any contact with either Bruce or Stuart. Depressed and alone, she was badly in need of companionship and counseling. It took time. Jennifer moved into her own apartment and slowly began the process of rehabilitation. She confided in Lori, telling her of her torrid affair years ago with Bruce Henderson. Lori advised her to go after what she really wanted. At the foster residence, Liz vacillated between her feelings for Sam Powers and for Bill, each of whom was reluctant to place any pressures on her. In the end, Liz declined Sam's proposal of marriage, and Sam left Genoa City to pursue a substantially better job in Kansas. Bill, meanwhile, took Brock's advice to work at the senior citizens' home, helping the seniors out in small ways. Brock also persuaded Kay to do what she could for the seniors. Appalled at the deplorable conditions she found there, she pledged to completely refurbish the recreation room. The foster family was now growing closer together. For the first time in years, they felt the warmth of a close family unit. Lori Brooks had been without a man for perhaps the longest stretch in her life. She lost Brad to Leslie, had a brief non-sexual alliance with Philip after Jill married Brock, and was unable to stir any interest on Brock's part because he, too, was trying to find himself. Her most serious prospect was the young Dr. Mark Henderson, who immediately piqued her interest by resisting her attempts at seduction. She later learned that Mark was impotent, and she promised to help him with this problem by using a sensory therapy technique she had learned in Paris. After a particularly painful visit with her mother after the vasectomy, Lori asked Mark to spend the night with her. She assured him that although he couldn't be intimate, his being there with her was enough. Mark confessed he was falling in love with her. After Lori told her mother she was going to marry Mark Henderson, Jennifer, in a state of shock, told Mark he must immediately end his relationship with Lori because his father, Bruce Henderson, was also Lori's biological father. It was a secret Mark must never reveal to Lori or to anyone else. Mark told Lori he didn't love her, and she left Genoa City devastated. During the year, Gwen Sherman, Greg's true love, entered a convent, and Chris Foster continued her legal aid work. She and Snapper observed that Sally's baby was 1 year old. 1975 had been a long and difficult year, and no one was sorry to see it end. And that is the end of 1975. Stay tuned for the next episode, 1976. Namaste.